I think I have a lot to reflect on from this conversation. I'm really grateful for it. I appreciate what you're doing by having these conversations. It's a human experience that, although we experience it in different ways, people experience it together. And that's part of the mystery of it all as well. And that's beauty in itself.
This is the Inner Landscape Travel Agency. Let's saunter across the psyche through creativity, self-discovery, and the sacred. If you're curious, playful, and seeking, welcome. Hi, Anita. Thank you for joining for a conversational portrait. I found your work by asking ChatGPT to recommend contemplative worship music with M83 vibes, and listening to it, to your work, has been a uniquely enriching experience. It combines my favorite aspects of the ethereal, the voice as instrument, and sound as an expanded alphabet. And I've turned to it to soothe before bed, as a guide into a reflective state, and as a foundation for a mental state in which creating feels aligned with the ineffable reason we're here. It's been awe-inducing, it's been restorative, and it's been nurturing to the parts I wish to cultivate most in myself. And to create in this way takes vision and dedication. So I'm glad to get to know the person behind this magic. Welcome, Anita Tatlow.
Thank you. I mean, that's quite an introduction. I'm not sure if I've ever had anyone introduce me in that way before. Yeah, I think we could leave it there. You've summed it all up.
And we're done.
Yeah.
In exploring our inner landscape, we have to go inward, and that requires both a literal and a figurative silence. In your life, where's the silence?
That's a really good question. I think it's in the creating for me. I think creating has always been like an outlet, part of what I do. In fact, I've been reflecting recently on kind of like just like school and when we had like creative like projects to do, or like we would do poetry. I remember feeling like I was doing it well and having that feeling of, oh, I like this task that we've been set. And so I think the quiet comes because when you're creating, everything else is silenced. So kind of anxiety and fears and worries about the day to day, they're not part of your kind of visual pathway. And so I think for me, that's where the quiet comes, but it's not quiet as you would expect. It's a quiet of quieting the other voices. I've kind of suffered with anxiety and worry. I'm an Enneagram 6, so I'm always kind of thinking, forecasting, kind of, okay, what if scenarios, although I don't feel like I do that much at the moment, but when I'm in a bad space, I can do that. And so for me, the creativity, the whole process, the whether that's musically or lyrically, or kind of in the finessing, that's kind of, and maybe that's where that comes into the music, and you can hear that in the music, that there's the kind of meditative elements because that's where it's coming from.
What thoughts like to visit your silence?
I think if I imagine my brain working, and when I'm in a kind of creative space, it's almost like it's kind of reaching out to kind of capture, depending on if I have a kind of muse or a starting point or like kind of a theme to work with, or whether I am kind of just like, okay, maybe I've been given like a sonic landscape, if you like. A producer has sent me this piece of music, hey, we would love your vocals on this, or we would like some lyrics and vocals. What does that look like? Well, if the music is all I have, then it's kind of reaching and being like, okay, well, what is this speaking about? Is it speaking about? And I think there are places I go specifically. I've realized this. I'm like, oh, I have to broaden my writing. I'm like, is it speaking of like the spiritual? Is it speaking into dreams? Is it speaking into love? Is it speaking into nature? Those are kind of the things I kind of grasp with. And then from there, it's like almost like branches that reach out to kind of explore those spaces. So I think the thoughts in my silence find themselves directed, and then they kind of just like dig in, if that makes sense. And it's kind of part of my creative process. So I'd actually never thought of it in that way, that the silence is part of my creation and the creative process. And some of the thoughts are kind of, you could say inspired and kind of come to you like a light bulb. And then some of them, maybe they guide each other. And I think the brain has a really incredible way of doing that, that it kind of guides you down a path. But most often when I've kind of completed something, the final product I'm pretty happy with to put out into the world. And so kind of have to trust that process, trust the silence, trust the creativity, and kind of trust where it goes.
I think you mentioned the idea of where the muses are coming from, and that it's almost as if you're describing a process that starts from within but also connects from outside. Can you tell when, is it always the two working together? Can you tell when something's emanating from within whereas versus something's coming in?
Yeah, sometimes it can be as simple as somebody sends me a track and they've given it a title, and that can serve. I'm kind of like, oh, yeah, I see why they've given this title. Like, let's say, for example, it's like a Frozen title. There was one that I had that I've worked on that's going to be released, and kind of Frozen esque was a title. And it led to this kind of, the song's going to be called Cold Heart. And that was really fun. And I was like, I see absolutely why they've called it Frozen as a kind of placeholder title. And so that's inspired the whole thing. But then the concept I came up with was kind of just from that one word. Whereas sometimes people send me things and I'm like, nope, this is not going to end up as the same title. This is changed. And sometimes they're just like ID1, ID392, and you're like, okay, they haven't got a title for this. So then it's kind of fully open and see where everything takes us. And so yeah, it's kind of, but I think in those cases it's the most fun and the most especially if it really lands. And I think part of that, with it being, so a lot of the music I write is a collaborative process. I can kind of sense as well through working in just from the early stages whether this is going to be a kind of really easy collaboration and a really kind of, but I mean that in terms of not is the person easy to work with, but is the person, are we on the same page? Are we on the same creative page? And I love it when that happens. And I find it happens across genres. So I work a lot in the ambient music space, as you mentioned. I also work in the EDM space, kind of electronic dance music. I've done some dubstep and all kinds of things, kind of with me not producing, me as the vocalist, songwriter. And it's really interesting because it can happen across spaces. So it's not just like one genre specific that, kind of whether you kind of connect with where you're going.
There's something that I definitely want to dig into around these seeming polar opposites of the ambience that invites you in to reflect, and the euphoria from EDM, and the loudness that comes from there, as opposed to the contemplative quiet. I want to explore that a little bit later. There's something you mentioned in terms of the song title, and I almost started picturing it like there's this relationship, this interplay between the song title itself and its essence, and how if it's ID 292, there's more to play with. But you also mentioned the example of when you know the title doesn't work for what it is, and so you realize it's almost as if the title becomes, this is the best way to encapsulate in a series of words the absolute essence of that. You're synthesizing the entire experience of the song into this label that attempts to reference, that attempts to allude to its entirety.
Right. And so I think there's something really interesting in that, because often, just in terms of kind of the music I work within, I think the best songs have been the ones where, let's take the EDM world, where the title has been really obvious. So I just had a track recently called Feels Like Summer, and it was exactly that. It's like what it says on the tin. It's like completely just feel good summer anthem. It's done pretty well for an indie release lately. It was a collaboration with a Danish producer, whom I'm working a little bit with. And yeah, that was just like super like straightforward, but very, very surface. But that kind of music wants to be very surface. So it doesn't go deep. Like it's kind of feel good. People are sending us videos from around the world, kind of having euphoria type, is the right kind of word for it. Yeah. And then there are songs that kind of go deeper. And I actually cultivated this recently. So I hadn't done a kind of fully ambient release of my own until this year. And for this release, I kind of wanted to maintain a level of control. Control's not quite the right word, but I wanted to kind of be the kind of mastermind, if you like, behind the process and the project and where it would end up. And I wanted it to be a complete kind of journey and a complete arc. And so the EP is called Nocturne, which is Latin for belonging to the night or of the night. And I basically came up with 5 titles that were kind of within that sphere. So we have Vespers, which is whispers, and Sanctus, which is sanctuary, and then Aurora, which is dawn. The actual translation, we always think of Aurora Borealis, but the Aurora is the dawn, and Sanctus Solis, so the sun. So they're all kind of linked in that way. And then I came up with a key for each of them, and an ambient lyrical concept. And with that, I sent each of them to various producers in the ambient sphere, from around the world, based in Europe, based in the States, in these cases. And just what came back was just like mind blowing, because they had all just gone with it. Like they got it. They got the whole theme. They got the vision of where it was going. And each of those songs was just like this perfect representation of each of those things. So we have Solace, Vespers, Sanctus, Aurora, and then I did Nocturne just as me. My husband produced it. And Nocturne was super interesting for me because we often get asked the question of whether we write any music in 432 hertz. Now, to explain this, most modern music is written in 440. And that's kind of what a piano is tuned to. That's what a typical orchestra of the modern day is tuned to. But there is this thinking that actually the mathematical frequency of the universe is 432 hertz, so it means that everything is tuned slightly lower. It's not like down a semitone, but everything is just pitched slightly down. And the thinking with creating music at 432 is that people feel that it's calmer, that it's more relaxing. And whatever you think of that, it definitely is kind of the frequency of the universe. Is in tune with the universe. And so for Nocturne, I wrote it in that. And a really interesting thing happened with my 18-month-old. It's the song that will send him to sleep when he is not going to sleep like he should. And that has just, I'm really trying my best. I need to like record it on a GoPro one time, like when I've got it on my phone, and because it's really fascinating to me that he is, yeah, like people say this about this frequency, and then here it is playing out with my baby. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, we haven't done many things, but I feel like that's something I want to explore a little bit more as well. And as you kind of delve into it, there's just so much in this space that's kind of around like being at one with the music, being at one with like the lyrics or the sounds and the concepts. Like you say, it kind of goes deeper. Yeah, it's really interesting to me.
What was that experience like for you of being the creative director of the sound that you wants to cultivate and then to send it out to the people you've found to be the right creative partners and to have this singularly collaborative sound that they understood you, you understood them. There's this an exchange of this creative union.
So my husband and I run a couple of record labels in the ambient space, and so we have this just community of incredible ambient producers who are doing incredible things, and collaboration is really a part of the ambient space. It happens all the time. People are so used to doing it, and I think partly because we've done it for so long, we're so used to kind of letting go a little bit. But also I just had huge trust in these people because I know what they've put out. Lots of them have kind of, they're doing so well. Everyone's doing like, just in terms of like numbers, but also in terms of like art, just the art is just incredible. And so we chose a kind of spectrum intentionally of kind of people in different spaces who would give a different sound, and kind of were intentional about who we gave each title to. And we just kind of wrote to them and said, hey, are you up for this? This would be the concept, and this would be, here's the kind of starter, let us know. So people had an out if they were like, hey, this is not for me. But I think overall people were pretty happy to jump on board. I was very excited. I wouldn't want to say everyone else was really excited because it's like my project. So I was very excited. And we released them all as singles. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm just so grateful. They just blew me away. And like Jameson Nathan Jones, who collaborated on the final track, he's a fantastic organ player. We gave him Sanctus, and it was just so appropriate because we've got this organ sound. And then he took a picture when he was in the church one day and the light was coming through, and he was like, hey, I just created this kind of motion with the church just to use on like Instagram because this just happened in this moment, and I just thought it was so appropriate with what we've made together. And yeah, just there were moments like that, and I was kind of blown away, and just really thrilled to kind of see it all come together. It just, and to have that like with the title being Nocturne, and with the night being such a complex thing, which is what we were trying to convey, it just made sense to not let that be like a lone EP, like a lone star in the middle of the night, because the night is not that. There's so much going on at the night. The night inspires me in so many ways. My first EP, Lights, which was more kind of a kind of like alternative indie pop, more just because I had just had these ideas and I wanted to put them out in the world. That was the only reason I created that EP, and I love it. It was all inspired by the kind of city lights. I'd always written about like nature, and I'd written about kind of the earth side of those things or the heart side of those things, but I'd never written about the kind of the city, the kind of gritty, neon esque parts of the night. And for me, the night is so complex. We live in Hong Kong, and you see that you've got the kind of neon lights and the, concrete jungle of Hong Kong. And then you have, you can go to places in the world where it's like, oh, it's the Milky Way, and you can see the stars, and there's the Aurora. We lived in Sweden for 5 years, and you've got the Aurora Borealis, and it's so complex. You've got the sounds of the night, whether those are nature or like man-made. There's just so much to explore. And I love it when life gives us those things to work with and create. And it's one of the things that gives me hope as well, that AI will not take over the creation, the art world, because it can't experience in the way that we as humans experience, with the complexities and drawing from what you see and what you hear and what you, all the senses coming into play as well, to bring inspiration into what we create.
Even so early into this conversation, there's this theme of all the modalities coming together, the synthesis of so much, and also a considerable amount of intentionality behind the projects. And I can certainly relate to your 18-month-old, because this is exactly the album that I use also for Aurora. Is the track from an attorney that is just guaranteed, that between the length and the sounds, they're guaranteed to help me to get to a calmer state. You mentioned the ease with which you and your community of fellow ambient music creators are able to interact. I'm curious whether, how you would consider it, maybe also beyond the your creative collaborators, your creative co-conspirators. Um, in your life, who are the people with whom you can share silence?
So my husband and I work together, and we are often met with the response, how can you work together? Especially by other married couples. That, not everybody, but that is a really common theme, that people seem to be like, I could not work with my spouse and live with my spouse and do all the things with my spouse. But it's been a really intentional journey for us. We've loved it. So we went into kind of having regular jobs in our early 20s. And then kind of 10, 11 years ago, we actually said, no, we feel that we should be creating. He's a musician, producer. We feel that we should be creating together. And so we did. We quit our jobs, but not with any intention to become starving artists and kind of do it in that way. We were ready to kind of forge the way and figure out what that is. And that has involved, for the last 10 years, like one of us working part-time, and actually it's kind of then been me working part-time for a lot of that, up until this year when I was able to leave my job, and we both now work, thanks to my husband, on our own music, and I can be a mom as well. But this is my only job, and it's just the most freeing thing ever. And so in answer to your question, I think, he's a person where I find silence, where I find peace. We can just be together. And actually one of the things, so we have 2 children, and the youngest is 18 months old. And actually recently, in the last few months, we've just kind of begun to find more space together, and just and we were like, oh, we were missing this, having like 2 children under 5. We realized that actually we just kind of need that space together. And with me taking on more from the kind of business side of things has actually enabled us. In the other times we don't talk about work. If we do mention things, it's exciting for us and it's great, but we have the kind of, we can be business together, we can be family together, and then we can be us together as well. And that's really, really nice. And the other thing I would say is our close friends, because we've lived in different places, live in like one, two, three, maybe four continents around the world. Kind of the people who were definitely at one point it was four. I think it might be three continents now. But the people who were kind of in our wedding parties. So we have these people who are our kind of close friends, but because we live this international life, we are citizens of the world, as I like to say. We lived in London and then we lived in Sweden for 5 years, and now we live in Hong Kong and have been here for nearly 6 years now. We have those people and those times where you need the space with those people who are closest to you. That doesn't change with distance. And that has been fascinating to me. We went through a really hard year, a hard beginning of last year. Our son was born at 28 weeks, and he's absolutely fine and thriving now. But, I had a very difficult pregnancy, and then he arrived early, and he was in the neonatal ICU for 9 weeks. And like, people stepped up for us around the world. They weren't necessarily, we had a fantastic community here in Hong Kong who are also some of those people who just stepped up to bring us food and just do stuff, provide childcare for our other son and those kind of things. But then we had these people who we could just call and just be like, really, how are you doing? Like, it was those kind of moments. And it's been on the other end as well, where we've got close friends who've had suffered deep losses over the last few years, and we can call them, we can message them, and we can be like, hey, and kind of you pick up where you left off. And so a lot of those people are the silences. I remember a friend saying to me when we were in high school, we used to walk home every day together. And he said to me one time, he was like, when you've really like made a true friend is when you can walk home together in silence and no one needs to say anything. And that really stuck with me because I was like, yeah, like we were just so comfortable just walking, and just being. We'd done it so much that you just like, okay, yeah, this is this is what it is. And so I think you find that, and we live in this age where we're just so fortunate that we can reach out to people at the click of a button, which wasn't always the case. And I know for my husband and his family growing up, they grew up in Sweden, but their parents or his grandparents were all in the UK, and communication wasn't the same kind of 30 years ago as it is today. And so we're really fortunate. We can speak to our families every week. We can speak to our friends whenever we choose. And I'm just grateful to say that I have this worldwide community, this of people who I can just call on and who hopefully feel they can call on me as well.
One of the more common themes today is this discussion of loneliness or the absence of connection. And what you've described is something that I think many aspire to, and perhaps many lack. I'm curious, what do you think it is about your values and what you embody in your relationships that you've been able to cultivate this?
I don't think what I am describing is any different to, say, somebody's relationship with a really good friend, or a best friend that they live in close proximity to. I think the difference comes when you change your mindset as to how you perceive that friendship. And so, because many of those friendships, those friends themselves have moved abroad, whether it's for a season or continuously. We all share that mindset of, oh, but life goes on and we can do this, even though we're not in the same place. And because we've lived in international communities in Stockholm and here in Hong Kong, with a lot of people who are also in the same kind of place from so many different cultures around the world, I would add to that, because this is not culture specific. If you have this kind of, if you're used to moving internationally or you have experienced that, then you realize, oh, hey, you make friends for life. And you don't have to speak to each other every day. You don't have to see each other every week or month. It's okay. Like, we have friends who I know, if I said, hey, we're coming to visit you for the summer, they'd be like, great, we'll get the rooms ready. We have people in Europe who, when we go back, we cannot wait to see. And I think sometimes friends, in my experience, have found that easier to come to terms with than family. And I actually think my family have done a really great job lately. Like, my parents are coming out to Malaysia, and we're flying out to Malaysia, and they're going to meet us there later in the year. We've done the same in Singapore, so they're kind of really embracing the travel and the kind of, hey, this allows us to do these things, which I just so appreciate, and appreciate that they can do that. But I do think that if maybe family or friends haven't experienced that, and you kind of say, hey, like, how do we show up for one another? It can create just a miss of perspective, or even hurt as well. Because people's expectations of, hey, what family and having children who are cousins looks like, this is not that. And so, yeah, it's kind of, sometimes it's difficult to navigate in those spaces, but also there's so much fruit that comes from it. And there's so much, we often say, we talk about our chosen family. We have our families, and then we have our chosen family as well, which is kind of the people who we're around and who will show up for us and our kids, and that as well. And that's really special. A lot of people in Hong Kong in our circle seem to use that kind of phrase, our chosen family here in Hong Kong.
The idea of a chosen family is something that is particularly resonant for you. Would you be open to go into more detail there?
Yeah, so I think it's just, I love my family dearly, and they are our family. I grew up living around the corner from my grandparents, had a really, really close relationship with them. And so there's a part of me that's really sad that my children don't experience that with my parents in the same way. But what they do experience is like really intense, loving, joyful blocks of time with them. Often where we're all creating new memories together, because it's not just them coming to Hong Kong. And that's so special, and it's different, and it may not be what they thought. It's not what we thought was going to happen, but it's the reality. And so that's amazing. But I think also, in the absence of them being here, there's also a lot of people whose families, we have friends whose children have grown up and have now gone and moved from Hong Kong to other places. And we meet them, and they're maybe kind of got children who are teenagers, or they've got children who are just off to university, or children who are maybe grown up and married but haven't yet had children. So they're kind of just heading towards the grandparent age. And so we have people who show up for our kids as aunties, as uncles, as like substitute grandparents. And so, yeah, there's a lot of love to go around, and our kids are so loved in this space. And one of the things we love, so around Chinese New Year, kind of community shows up, and in Hong Kong you give red packets to children, and the red packets have money inside, like just kind of like, you know, $1 $2 bills it would be in the US. And you give it to them, and parents give it to their children, and it's just this lovely thing. And I remember, because our eldest son is 4.5 and he's adopted from Hong Kong, so he has that Chinese heritage, that Hong Kong heritage, but we are not Chinese. And so we want to give him those cultural experiences, but we can't do that without our families all being here as well, doing the same things. And so on Chinese New Year, everybody shows up. Like, you know, you go around and you say Gong Hei Fat Choi, which is Happy New Year, and they give the children these red packets, and we do it to our kids' school friends, and their parents do it to our kids, and at church. And there's just this whole community that shows up for children. And so in some ways, I'm really grateful for that, because although we don't have our families close by and it's not the childhood I had, it's giving them a cultural experience living here that is important to their development. It's important because this is the place that we are. And I don't feel that they're missing out. I feel like they get the best of both worlds.
I want to go back a bit to the subject of silence and thoughts. I'm curious, what are the thoughts you most enjoy thinking?
One of the things that I have explored through writing music has been emotion. And it's been emotion on across the spectrum. So from the kind of negative emotions to the really positive emotions. And it's something that I often have had felt was more complex than we give it credit for. I've just listened to Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart, in which she explores, I think it's like 70 something emotions and human experiences. And I felt like I was right. This is complex. And I love how she defines everything and is kind of like, hey, yeah, this is what makes us human. I really enjoy, I think I really enjoy that because I feel like I have experienced a lot of them. I have met people who have said to me that they have a really hard time with joy. And it was helpful for me to hear Brene Brown say, joy is like a moment and it's fleeting, but it kind of opens you up to experiencing other emotions. I think that's what she said. And for me, I have experienced that true joy. I experience happiness. I I feel very content in my life. And I try and name the emotions when I come to them. And it's something I maybe have done to help with kind of anxiety and fear and the unknown. I enjoy thinking about this kind of plethora of emotions and exploring what that looks like for the heart and looks like poetically, looks like in a spiritual space. So yeah, I think emotions is something I enjoy thinking about, but also because it brings me great contentment when I'm at peace with how I feel. And if there's something that doesn't feel at peace, I want to know what it is. What brought on that feeling? Where did it come from? Was it a thought? Was it something somebody said? Or is it that there's something going on under the surface that I need to visit and deal with as well?
To feel those many emotions, to know that there's a tremendous range, there's some degree of sensitivity and also receptivity that maybe you're born with and also that you you cultivate. How have you navigated embracing those sides, and what one may embrace and one may numb? And it sounds, from everything you've described, that you've chosen to really explore all the nuances in them, and that you've maintained this receptivity to those that you want to keep exploring.
Right. And I think, I mean, if you asked me to name all the 70 emotions, I couldn't do it. There was a, but I think since I met my husband, he said, he has said that he finds it a lot easier to talk about his feelings, to kind of name his feelings, because I do it. And so, but I think it was kind of like my internal way of kind of when I felt anxious about things, of being like, well, why do I feel like this? And as soon as I could kind of place, oh, because I thought this, oh, well, that was silly. Okay, and put it out my mind. Because it would often be something that just kind of entered and then kind of gave me this feeling that would kind of just halt me from moving forward, or just gave me a feeling of unease. And so I kind of, I think even as like a teenager or something, just kind of cultivated, okay, I'm feeling this. Why am I suddenly feeling kind of nervous about this? What's going on? And it's been really interesting because now I'm teaching a 4-year-old how to deal with his emotions. Whole different, whole different thing, but also the same, of kind of like, well, what are you feeling? And he's very good at naming his feelings. And then we're now dealing with, okay, what do you do when you feel angry? And what do you do when you feel all these things? But learning to cope with them, and Brene Brown talked about this, learning to cope with feelings or name them helps you. If you can do that as a child and you can develop ways that are good for you, it helps you as an adult to become just more um, emotionally aware and emotionally available. And then hopefully you won't pass on any of your kind of negative traits that you had through unresolved emotional difficulties and those kinds of things. I think it's become apparent to me that trying to help my son as he navigates being happy, sad, and particularly angry, and what to do with that. You know, my hope is that I'm not passing any kind of negative emotional experiences that I had as a kind of child, youth, onto him. I'm trying to help him. Okay, let's understand this so that as he grows up as a kind of fully formed adult, fully formed human, able to emotionally regulate so that he can deal with life in a kind of, even better way.
What was your earliest experience in trying to understand yourself and what the world is?
I don't know actually, but I remember feeling as a child not necessarily understood um, by anyone, because but I don't think that's a problem. I think we have to best understand ourselves. So I think that's where these tools come in, because how can you expect somebody else to fully understand the emotional complexity of what you're going through, because they're not going through it? But I think having the verbal communication tools to work through those things does help, and helps us to say to somebody else, hey, this is what I'm going through right now, just so you know where I'm at. But if the only tools that we have is I'm happy, sad, angry, scared, which is kind of what we kind of boil it down to, then how can we expect somebody to understand the nuance when there is a whole range of things that we're going through? And so quite a lot of the spiritual music, let's say on the spiritual side of things, has been born out of kind of times when I've gone through really difficult things of kind of sadness, grief, disappointment, betrayal. There's a whole, there are just four that I can think of, emotions that also provide part of the life experience. And so we've written together, me and my husband, we've written music in those kind of darker spaces. We've written music in kind of the lighter spaces. And then actually, as one of our projects, we wrote an album called For All the Moments in Between. And it was to kind of say, hey, sometimes you're in a pit and it's dark and there's grief and there's sadness and everything is there. And that's fine. And you need to lament and you need to rest in that place. And you just need to hear somebody say, I see you. I see you in your space and I understand and I'm with you. And sometimes you are celebrating and you are joyful and life is good and it's, the harvest season and there is that. And you hope people again come alongside you and say, I celebrate with you. I am there. That is where I am. And then there's lots of times where we're in the middle and we're in all these different spaces in between. And sometimes I think those people don't feel validated to be like, okay, how are you? I'm okay. That's fine too, because it's part of the human experience. And there is, there's space for you in those places. There's music for you in those places. There's music to meet you. And I think that's what we're doing. We're trying to create music to meet people in those spaces across that spectrum. And I'm no expert on emotions. I'm not Brene Brown, but I found it fascinating because I felt like it tied into what I have been feeling, exploring as an artist, and will continue to explore, that there are emotions behind the projects. There are emotions behind some of the themes. And there's so much more to be explored as well.
Stretching and embracing the liminal, and it's not just the intense lows and the intense highs where we can derive meaning. When have you felt understood?
I think it's a really interesting question. And maybe as you were saying it, I was like, oh, okay. Well, where are we looking for validation? Because I feel really validated in the music I'm creating across different projects, because people listen to it, because seemingly people like it. It's resonating with people. I hope it continues to do that. So on the one hand, through kind of that validation, I feel seen. I feel really, really content. I'm grateful for every day that I get to do this. I don't take it for granted. It's been a kind of 10-year getting to this point, I will add. So I think musically, I feel seen. And I know there are people in the space who don't feel that. And I would encourage them just to continue to create, because for me, it was never about numbers, although that's nice. It's a nice cherry on the top. But for me, I think there was a moment when, so I apologize that I'm answering all of your questions tangentially, but that's what it's kind of making me do. So with my EP Lights, which I released under my own name, so I released them as singles and then brought it together as an EP. My husband and I were chatting. So Ben is my husband. I'll refer to him as Ben from this point on. Ben and I were chatting about how to release it. Should we release it under an existing project? We've got many: Salt of the Sound, Narrow Skies, all of those kinds of things. And then actually we felt, no, it wasn't stylistically right to release it as part of those. And so we made the decision to release it under my own name. It was the most daunting thing I've ever done. And I don't know why. Well, I didn't know why, but I do know why. Because it was like, if you're putting your music out there under your name, you're not hiding behind a band name, a moniker, like something else. And it's not a collaborative project. It's not a band. It's just you. And so then it's a question of like, okay, well, if no one likes this, is that a reflection on me? Or is it just they don't like the music? Or what does that mean? Because I like this and I'm proud of it. And so you let go of some of those things. And I think, yeah, it had listeners. It wasn't like, you know, the most well received thing ever, but I'm still so proud of it. I'm so proud that I put it out because by doing that, it opened up this pathway to me creating as me. And I've never felt, until I explored this, I'd never felt so free because I was writing a Salt of the Sound in this kind of Christian bubble, ambient space. Then I was writing as Narrow Skies, which again has its own themes, kind of style. And then for me, I didn't have anything else. So this is my project where I'm kind of like, okay, a lot can go in this. And it's really funny because I just got a playlist from Spotify. They give out this is playlist. So this is Anita Tatlow. So I just got one. And you can't get it until you meet certain criteria. But it's really funny because I posted about this and then I was telling people, I was like, okay, so if you go to this playlist and you hear all my stuff, it kind of falls into different categories. So they've got the ambient, you've got the EDM, and you've got this kind of alt, kind of indie pop folk stuff. And I don't think Spotify algorithms like that as a general rule for you to be so diverse, but I don't really care. But I really like that it's all out there and it's me, and it's opened this door for me to collaborate with kind of ambient artists, EDM producers, like in a really legitimate way that is just so fun, so freeing. I can write in a variety of styles. It's like completely opened up just doors for me. I'm constantly kind of working on new stuff with other people on my own, etc., etc. So I think it's being understood that, and tying into the emotions thing, that I'm complex as a person, and that hasn't been, it's not what I started out to do under my own name, but it's kind of got these kind of offshoots. And I love that because all of those are kind of aspects of me that actually keep me really fresh when I'm creating, because I can write in so many different styles and genres. I actually feel for one of the first times that I don't have a kind of creative block because I'm not pigeonholing myself into, okay, you must write this in this style. I kind of create and I'm like, yeah, this is coming at the moment. So, and actually the other week we were trying to create something for one of the projects. It just wasn't happening. We were like, okay, let's put this on the back burner. It's not happening. That's not in the space that we are right now. And so, yeah, it's been freeing. And so I think that's me feeling understood.
What about misunderstanding? What's an impactful time that you've been misunderstood?
I think it's happened on several occasions. And I think one of the things, I try and give people grace especially when you work across cultures and across just countries and things. I try and give people the benefit of the doubt that they're coming with good intentions, but I don't think everybody gives that. I don't think everybody comes with the idea that everyone's coming with good intentions. So I think you can be misunderstood without even doing anything. And I think sometimes I have been with people I've worked physically with rather than like all these like online interactions have been great. But I think there have been some times where I've worked with people in person and I feel like maybe they've already made a judgment about me before anything takes place. And so then you're kind of coming in from behind. And I think it's hard if you're kind of, you have to work with them through a job or something like that. Um, but I think it also helps you to kind of choose your people in life as well. Like who is a good person, who is on the same kind of wavelength as me, who is on the same path and the same journey and is open to kind of seeing the best in people. And so I think that's what I try and do. And hope that people would kind of afford the same grace, but it doesn't always happen. And I'm not always an innocent party in that as well, because I think when those things can happen, it's very easy to kind of then do the same thing and kind of make judgments about people. But I think it goes down to the complexity of kind of humans and trying to understand kind of why somebody reacts in a certain way. And I mean, if I feel a little bit like if we all did therapy, like we would all end up just in a better starting place where some of these things might not happen. But somebody said something really interesting to me once, which is if you have a conflict with somebody, stop and think what percentage of this is on me, because it's never 100% on the other person, as much as you might want to think it. And that was helpful to me in terms of kind of growing and thinking, yeah, okay, there was a part that I had in this that didn't make it an easy transition.
I imagine this is a question we'll keep revisiting indirectly through the rest of the discussion. I think about being in a space with someone, and I'm fascinated how we might look at the same thing but experience it very differently, in part because the unique set of life experiences, knowledge, skills, the apertures we've cultivated guide how we perceive something. And I'm curious, through your life experience, what do you generally in a room see that today few others can? Where do you see more depth and nuance and intricacy in something? Because you've cultivated those sides of you.
I'm pretty good at reading when someone's like uncomfortable in a space and seeing that other people haven't realized that that person's uncomfortable in the space. Um, and I think that just comes from an emotional intelligence awareness, which I've always, as we've discussed, I've always tried to foster this. And I feel that a lot of our music is based on this. But I've realized it's not something that everybody experiences. And so it allows me kind of sometimes to kind of say, hey, are you okay, to that person? And I know that I have appreciated when people have done that to me in a, and not just are you okay, but I think when we went through the stuff with our son, I realized like a really good question to ask someone who's going through a really hard time is, what do you need right now? What can I do right now? What do you need? And I had friends who asked me that rather than just sending thoughts and prayers. They said, what do you need right now? Like practically, like emotionally, what do you need? And they gave examples. And so I had a friend who, well, we had a few friends, but one friend basically just took my child after school every day for a while, and happens to be a mother of his best friend at the time. So that was helpful. But just was like, yeah, we'll take him. No problem. That's what we see you need. Somebody else, without even asking, set up this rota so that there, or roster, as you might say, that there were meals, lunch, snacks, and dinner like sent to us every day for 3 weeks. And other people gave us lifts to the hospital. Other people, you know, paid for taxis for us to get to the hospital. Other people just kind of showed up with like baby stuff at the hospital. It was just like the list was endless. Like sometimes people said, what do you need? What can I do right now? And some people just showed up and said, here is the stuff that you probably don't know that you need. Here it is. And so, and a lot of those people were not necessarily people who were like the most close to us in terms of relationship, but it fostered that after the fact. And it was also people who we had shown up for in ways that we didn't know. And so you realize the kind of the reciprocal nature of the human experience. Sometimes you don't know a simple action that you have done that's had a profound impact on somebody else, that then when it's your hour of need, they're like, I need to show up for this person because they showed up for me. And without going into detail, that was exactly what happened in this experience, that I didn't realize I had shown up just through being me, just through my actions for this other person, through something I'd said, something I had done. And then they created these handmade meals for us and homemade meals for us. And it was just like, oh, wow, thank you. And they just showed up. And it's cultivated a really nice friendship in a way that these experiences can, these kind of hard experiences can. And it brings light to them. It brings light and it brings life and it brings joy. And so for me, looking back at that time, it wasn't a negative, it's not a negative experience for me to remember. It's Ethan was in the hospital being treated so well with great medical care. And we had this community that showed up for us. And we will be forever grateful.
Before these communities, before these realizations, take me back to 2008. You're in university. You just met Ben, and you bonded over you met over music and bonded over faith. What questions were you living through then?
So Ben and I, when we met, we had both had kind of semi-serious relationships that we'd just come out of, kind of 3-year relationships or something. And so we actually met when we were both single in like within kind of like a few months of that. And so neither of us was really looking for a kind of long-term relationship. But we did connect and we found that we had a lot in common, and it was kind of, serendipitous in many ways. We're really glad we did meet. Because if we weren't together, I mean, I think he might be doing what he's doing, but it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the same experience if we weren't together. And so, yeah, it was a very different time. I think both of us were looking to not make mistakes that we'd made in previous relationships. So I think we were both kind of starting out on a kind of semi-aware journey of ourselves in that process. And we always say, oh, we're really glad that we kind of had those previous relationships to make mistakes. And then when we met, we both knew, again, like, you know, however much you can place blame on the other party, like there's a percentage to which maybe you had a part in it. And so I think you could say we started our relationship on a kind of journey of discovery, of self discovery. And we dated for a while before we kind of were official as a couple. And so I think all of those steps in the process were really, really important. And I think, you know, we have very much been on this journey of discovery. We went through a phase where we really enjoyed exploring the Enneagram. We have done other things like, you know, people do Myers-Briggs and the Strengths Finders and those things as well. The Enneagram was kind of a key one for us. That really kind of spoke to us when I think we discovered it when we were both in kind of maybe a negative space. And then it was really insightful. I don't explore a lot of it now because I feel like I'm operating in a more positive space, which is just an interesting side note. But yeah, maybe the fact, I haven't thought about it, but maybe the fact that we came into the relationship together with some sort of self-awareness has kind of allowed that journey of self-awareness to kind of continue and flourish and, well, even continue. Like, I hope it continues.
As your relationship deepened, you created Salt of the Sound. And that name comes from a well known verse and even more common phrase of salt of the earth. I'm curious, as Salt of the Sound, what's been your experience with being the salt and giving flavor to people's lives so that they might hear and might know?
Yeah, I think Salt of the Sound is so interesting to me because it's not what we started out to create. So it's really evolved into this space over kind of 11 years since we started. And it's become this ambient Christian spiritual music that people use in times of personal reflection, prayer, meditation. Some of the songs have lyrics, some of them are instrumental. And I think it's not, because it's not what we started out to create, but it has become this. And because it's got a spiritual depth to it, I feel like we have followed the journey to where it is, and we continue to be open to where it will go. And that has that has really helped us because I think when you start creating music, if you're only creating a mirror image of what is out there, then music would stay the same. But I think in the Christian world specifically, Christian music has although it's like diverse, it's not as diverse as the music scene. And it's not necessarily as complex as well. So we've been considered kind of pioneers of Christian ambient music because we were one of the first people to be really doing it in this space. Now there are a few more people kind of doing that as well. But we didn't realize how important that was and how much of a gap that was. And so when I started writing as a kind of early songwriter, and I cringe a little bit when I think back of some of the early stuff we wrote, I was trying to kind of emulate other Christian artists that I heard, but I wasn't leaning into kind of my skill set in a way that I am now. And I heard somebody say recently, it's okay within what you are doing to not be great at everything. And I'm like, oh, yeah. So, like, for example, it was an actor who was saying it. And so he was saying, I'm really good at Broadway and I'm really good at this kind of character and I'm portraying this. But don't ask me to do this because I will fail. And I think it's the same. If you ask me to be a replica or a kind of subset of this, some people will do that really well because that is them. Like if they can, you know, there are really, really good Christian artists out there. And there are new ones coming up who can be as good as them in that kind of country, in that folksy, in that kind of rock space, in that singer songwriter space. For me, that was not where it was flowing in terms of being a singer songwriter. And one of the first things that we did was that was a bit of a light bulb moment was, oh, well, maybe we don't need to do a kind of verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, end. Maybe we can create like, here's a track and it's ambient and then it has some vocals and then it does this ending and then it fades. And maybe that's enough because that's what the essence of the song is and that's what it needs to convey. And when we did that, in fact, we had an EP called In Prayer, which I think we released in maybe 2017. And that was like a 17-minute journey of about 7 tracks. So they're pretty short. And some of the tracks had words or phrases. Some of the tracks were instrumental. But the idea was that it was an arch that took you on this prayer journey from beginning to end that you might experience in a church or other kind of religious place, spiritual place. And that was really well received by kind of community. We asked people from around the world if they would kind of help us create a video by recording snippets of Bible passages and we created, it's on YouTube, I think still. And that really was amazing for bringing kind of a community together of some people we knew, but most of them we didn't. Most people who are speaking in that we'd never met, and you had these people from all around the world. But creating that was a real like game changer in terms of, oh yeah, we can actually just create music that we feel is true to the sound, is true to ourselves, is true to what we're called to do in this space. And that's okay. And maybe the fact that I can't write a kind of worship song for a church that's like a kind of, corporate hit is okay as well. And so it's all of those things that kind of like letting go of some stuff and embracing. And it was that as well that kind of led us really into the ambient space. With Ben has several other projects that are in the ambient space. And so we have these kind of different hats to wear, but it means that none of the spaces get tired anymore. All of the spaces are kind of fresh because when we come back to it, the output might be less on each. Overall, our output is a lot. But it means that when we don't want to put, now we have this kind of philosophy that everything we put out there, we want to be proud of. And we want to, and not to say, well, I would say, yeah, I'm not proud of some of the early work, but I'm glad it's there for the journey that it represents. But everything we put out now, we want to be really proud of, and we want to feel like, yeah, this is our best work, and this is here for a purpose, especially in that space that is speaking to so many people.
And the fact that it speaks to so many people, you mentioned how you were very early, or one of the creators effectively of this Christian ambient space, the resonance it's had with people suggested there was an absolute need for it. And with the in prayer piece, what people were co-creating with you there suggests a latent need. And in general, prayer can be very talkative. Traditional music can be expansive. I mean, it even takes up the space that we might need for ourselves. And even when we're silent, we'll still fill our mind with words. I think with ambient music, with the work that you create, your work elicits a different kind of relationship. You create something for space and for silence, for
Mm-hmm.
space for someone to hear and to fill. And it can become this bridge of resonance between ourselves and the ineffable, and also between all of us. And I think that, and I mean this term in every sense, that's a universal gift that many need and only few can give. And you realize that with deliberately, you intuited, you ambled towards it. And I think that's also the nature of ambient music. It's this intimation of an experience that invites the listener into a relationship. It soothes us enough for us to be able to let out what needs to be elicited by the track, but by the music. And I think that's also a contrast with traditional worship music, which presents or may present a finished song for an enjoyable reaction. It's complete other than you're participating in this co-creation.
Right. And I think it goes to what you were saying at the beginning when we were talking about silence. Because as an artist, we talked about, when you're creating, it kind of fills that silence. But I think as a listener, if you go to kind of meditate or pray or reflect, and then a train goes past, and then you're like, oh, train. It's like the kind of, oh, squirrel, squirrel moment. Or if there's a plane going overhead, or, oh, hey, there's a dog barking, or the neighbors are having an argument, or whatever. Whereas I think just on a very base level, like having that kind of music as the kind of background, well, that takes away some of the kind of background noise of just your mind. And I think it gives a focus as well. And sometimes we need a focus. I don't know if you've ever done the mindfulness app, but it's kind of like he's like, let the thought come in, just let it go away, all of those things. But I think there's so much noise in our minds, that, yeah, both maybe for the creator and the receiver, there is this kind of quietness that is created by the music because it quiets the rest of the stuff from around.
It's like presenting someone with the fertile, amorphous essence that they can co-create with, so that they have to imbue themselves in there. I'm curious, when you create or you perform your music, are you speaking to someone? Are you imagining an individual, a group, a whole, or something else?
I think it varies. I think it depends on, like, the essence of the track. Sometimes a kind of title or a theme will, I've written tracks where I've kind of thought about a specific person and kind of their grief, and it's been a kind of prayer over them. And that was in the case of Kyrie eleison, a setting of that was a kind of setting, thinking about somebody else's grief and kind of praying over them. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. I've just written a new collaborative track with Simon Wester, and it's called Restore. And he gave the title to the track, but I was really, really happy with the lyrics that I created, which just kind of came. And in many ways were inspired by a verse in the Bible, which is ashes to beauty. But I never put that phrase together as a whole in the track. It's kind of split because I feel sometimes things can feel a little bit trite when you try and take like a Bible verse and it's like sometimes. And so I try and just be like, okay, how can I poetically explore this and convey what I want to convey, but in a softer way? And so, yeah, that will come out I won't spoil it. It will come out in a few months' time. But it's kind of, that was a great example of, he'd written this track. He thought Restore was a good working title, and that was an inspiration to me. And it all just kind of just fell into place very, very easily. And I also trust the process, especially with Salt of the Sound, that when those things happen, I feel that that is a kind of divine affirmation, that it's right. It feels right. I very much trust my gut in how. Oh, so I feel like this is going to sound weird. I very much trust my gut when I'm creating, and I have come to realize that I feel, and maybe everyone feels this, but I feel like I have good discernment when it comes to what I create now. I don't feel I always did, or maybe I did, but I just ignored the kind of niggly feeling that something wasn't quite right. Whereas now, and because I work with my husband, I think that does make it easier for, if one of us is like, I'm not sure about this, we can just say that to each other in a way that maybe you can't say, maybe you can. I do say it to other people as well, if we're not happy, and they say it to me too, so that's good. But I think when it's our stuff and it's just the two of us, we're maybe more picky than we would be if it was a collaboration with somebody else. Because when it's a collaboration with somebody else, you have to let some stuff go because it's subjective. Like, you have a certain way of doing things, they have a certain way of doing things. Ultimately, if you're working with good people, it's going to be great. But when it's the two of us, I know that we put our discernment hats on tighter and really make sure that we're both really happy, because there's nobody else to bounce the ideas off. But also, we can kind of say to each other, hey, we need to make this tweak, or I'm just not happy with that there. Or sometimes even we'll kind of finish a track and just be like, yeah, you know what? This is not where we thought it was going to land. And that's okay. And because I think because we're in that space and we release on our own label most of the time, we can just put it to one side. Whereas what can happen if you've done it as a collaboration, and I'll say this more in the EDM space, because I feel in the ambient space things kind of work out. In the EDM space, you can be like, okay, this didn't land, but then it gets submitted to a label anyway, or multiple labels, and they all reject it. And you're kind of like, I could have stopped this process earlier on. Maybe we needed to go back to the drawing board. Yeah, it's just funny. And I think sometimes you don't have that with other people, but you learn through doing, and maybe in the future I'll kind of be like, hey, maybe we should just either know, or either just to put a stop to it, or maybe revisit something earlier.
You mentioned how when with you and Ben, you have this very strong ability to say, not working. This is something, no, we're in the room together. We're in this project together. We know one of us can intuit something's not off. Something is off. Something's not right. I'm curious about how other people from your past, from your life, your influences show up for you. Your aunt and your grandmother had a formative role in your music training. How do they come up for you when you create or perform or record?
I am forever grateful for my family that I was able to have. So my grandma, who's now passed away, she taught me to play piano through to grade 8, kind of, and then I actually played at university for a year and a half. And yeah, she was a very accomplished pianist. She was a teacher and just taught the piano and taught so many people to play the piano. And she was very, very good. And then my aunt, who is my dad's brother's sister, so aunt by marriage, very, very kindly these people gave us gave me free lessons because they're family, and which was just so generous. But my aunt was a great classical singer, and so again did kind of all the grades, classically trained, through to grade 8, and I learned so much. And I think back and think, to begin with, I was like, oh, but I'm not a classical singer. And I think maybe some people might have thought, in my head at least, oh, she's not singing properly. She's not, you know. But the truth is, through doing that, I learned how to use my voice. I know how to make the right vowel sounds. I know how to breathe. I know how to do things. I've got a greater range for sure because I had singing training. And so I'm forever grateful. And so I don't feel that any of that was like a wasted experience. You know, if we need to record stuff in on the piano, or like Ben records stuff in on the piano, and we'll listen back and I'll be like, yeah, but you got to tweak this, because we can tweak it on the thing without actually tweaking it. So I'm like, well, you need to accent this because that's how you would play it. And you need to do this because that's how you would play it. And so it's such a great tool that I didn't realize I had. And I studied music at university, but really just because I was going to be a teacher, like an elementary school teacher, which I was for kind of 5 years. And that was what I wanted to do. So I was like, oh, well, I'll just do a degree that I can fall back on. That's fun. I like music. Great. So wanted to study music. It was a great experience. Loved it. Went to Nottingham in the UK, and it was a very well-rounded course. And so I did everything from kind of early music to world music to, which I feel is too small a genre for everything that is world music. But everything from like really early music to film music to like classical music, opera music, everything. And yeah, pop music. It was just, I'm just so grateful for all of those musical experiences, which I feel were paving the way for me to now be a musician and vocal artist in a way that I wasn't aware of at the time. And I don't think I could have been aware of at the time. But one of the things that went out of my mind earlier that's just come back is, I think when I released my EP as me was the first time where I was like, oh, I've kind of just achieved a life goal. Like as a kid, you have these kind of, what do you want to do? And it's like, oh, well, I'd love to be a singer and release my own music. And a lot of people do that. They pay to go to a studio to record, and they just do it. But for me, it was like, oh no, like really, as a professional artist, I've done this now. And I felt that with Salt of the Sound when we started it. And then it really, like the true contentment of that, when I then released like just an EP as me, was like, oh yeah, I'm doing what I always wanted to be doing. And that's like, yeah, it's an amazing feeling. And yeah, this year, my husband and I, we say to each other every day, we're like, so grateful for our family, so grateful that we get to do this. I'm not going to stop being grateful every day, because one day it could just all go. You never know. That's kind of how it feels. It feels silly to say it as well, but yeah, just kind of living in a bubble of contentment. And you just kind of like, okay, well, when's this bubble going to burst? But, you know, we have built up a business, we've built up a ministry, we've built up all these different projects. So hopefully people will continue to listen and we'll continue to be able to create music.
I'm enjoying this so much because it's exactly this journey of someone continuously becoming fully themselves, and you're embodying that so thoroughly. To what extent do you feel as if you've reached your aspiration of the truth and intimacy of the lyrics of Sarah Groves?
Oh, yeah. So one of the songs that Sarah Groves wrote was Add to the Beauty. And I just think that's so inspirational. And what I love about her is she was also able, in a singer songwriter way, to take these kind of concepts, Christian concepts, by concepts from the Bible, but pen them in a way that was or is just so poetic and so subtle but true. Um, and so her song Add to the Beauty is absolutely what I feel I want to be doing. And as an artist across all the spaces, is like, what does art do? Well, it should be telling a story of life. It should be adding to the human experience. It should be um, speaking to people. And so, if we are doing that in some small way, then it's such a satisfying feeling, but also something I'll continue to strive for.
In this creating and adding to life, your your early work was a Christian reflection on the hecticness of London. And then in Sweden, you and Ben grew curious about what it's like to live in other places, to understand the local faith and the culture and how what things are like there and how those influence each other, and to understand people more deeply. And the image that comes up for me there is this, you intermittently moving around the globe, creating something true that's suffused with the local essence, the ness of the place, and each work points at the truth from a different angle, kind of this ineffable truth. I'm curious, how much have you found your travels to influence your sound, or whether your work was a reflection that was location agnostic, that it still would have been that way regardless of where you were.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you can't help but be influenced by the places around you. And for us, we're so grateful that we've been able to live in, three of the biggest cities around the world. Well, Stockholm's not super big, but it's kind of quite famous. Yeah, living in those places, you realize I'm so glad we've lived in a place other than our own culture. So I'm British. Ben is British and Swedish, but his family are really British. They just live in Sweden. And Hong Kong, living in Hong Kong, totally different, but also is such a melding of multiple cultures because you've got the British influence and then you've got the Chinese influence. And it's a really, I mean, we love it here. Like we would recommend it to anybody. But it's such a beautiful kind of melting pot, if you like, of these cultures. Um, and also what people don't realize is there's always like sides of a place that nobody knows about. And so Hong Kong is kind of known for skyscrapers and concrete jungle, but also I think it's like something like 70% of Hong Kong is like basically jungle. It's like untamed. People go hiking. There's a lot of hikes to be had, and there's a lot of nature to explore. And it's stunning. It's like the scenery is stunning, and parts of Hong Kong are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And yeah, and we're so close to so much of Asia. And that again, we love to travel, and we've traveled to, I would say, probably most of kind of Southeast Asia at this point. And there's always stuff to learn and experience. And one of the things I always like to go, it's funny, I always like to travel with a kind of mindset of wonder. And that is to continue to be amazed. Like we've traveled with people who just kind of, they see something amazing and they're just like, oh, wow, great. And you're like, that's amazing. Like, did you realize what we just saw? This is so cool. Like, and so I'm trying to teach my kids, like, have a sense of wonder and awe in what you experience. Like, this is so cool. Um, or like, yeah, like this is so crazy. Like, did we just see what we thought we saw? Just to kind of always be on the lookout for kind of what's around you. Like, look up. I said to my son this morning, hey, look up. And he looked up, and someone had painted like a mural up high on the side of a building. And the colors were kind of grays and blues, which were representing a building in the distance that had kind of grays and then blue glass. And I realized that it was all tied in together. So whoever had done that was looking at what was around them to inspire that. And he said, it's the same as over there. And he saw it. And it was like, yes, I want you, even as like a small person, a 4-year-old, to look up and see, because there is beauty in those things. And so I think you can't help but be influenced and just inspired by what's around you. And when you look for it, so are other people in
Mm.
what they're doing, in the architecture, in the art, in the kind of interior design, in the, whatever it is. There are so many people creating beauty. And, through the sonic space, we want to do that too. We want to add to that beauty of a place. And in terms of the other thing I would say, when you say, are we influenced by a place? So when we arrived in Hong Kong that year as Salt of the Sound, we put out our second Christmas EP, which was called And on Earth Peace. And in some of the early tracks, so I think in Gabriel's message, we used some field recordings. Well, those field recordings were from Hong Kong. And they were recorded in the middle of July, because what better time than July, when it's like 35 degrees and 90% humidity, to create Christmas music. We're coming from
35, 35
yeah.
Celsius.
Oh yeah, Celsius. So that's hot. Yes. We're talking hot. We're coming from Europe, so Northern Europe. So we want cold for Christmas. So it's been a bit of that's been a transition for us, getting used to the warm Christmases. So yeah, so it's like, I love about that we have this kind of Gabriel's message, and the voices you hear at the beginning are the sounds of Hong Kong. But when you think about the heat that we recorded those sounds in and recorded the vocals in and all of those things, not dissimilar to how it would have been in Bethlehem, not dissimilar to, the Middle East and all those places where actually these things took place. And so there's a kind of, that was a reflection for me that was maybe obvious to many, but again, like a bringing together of worlds and of experiences. And yeah, we experienced then quite a few Christmases in Hong Kong because of COVID. And so we got used to having Christmas in the warm.
Speaking of experiencing the warmth of Bethlehem, have you been drawn to, have you explored singing in Aramaic, ancient Greek, or Hebrew?
I have not. I have sung in Swedish before, on Swedish TV, for the church that we worked with, because they did a kind of, I don't know what you'd say in the US. So in the UK, they have this program on a Sunday called Songs of Praise, when it's broadcast from a church. Well, they have a similar one in Sweden, and our church was quite big in Stockholm, and so they recorded some pieces, and we had an international congregation, but we had to do some of it in Swedish. And as the worship leader, I had to sing in Swedish. I can't remember what I sang, but somebody told me I sounded, because I worked really hard on like the pronunciation. But then when you sing in a language, it can be different. And so they said I sounded Sami, which is like the kind of people who live in Lapland in the very north of Sweden. And they said that's how my accent was. It was very, very North Swedish. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll let this rest. and be where it is. So no, I have not considered that because I don't know. I mean, I learnt Swedish to enough to kind of converse and broadly understand what's going on. And then I don't know if I could learn a language well enough to kind of do it justice when I didn't speak it and I didn't have someone who could kind of natively correct me. I'd have to work closely with someone to do that, to feel like it was very authentic. So I had Ben, who was able to kind of, who grew up in Sweden, speaks great Swedish, was able to kind of correct me, guide me along the way. And I did do another Swedish song for a guy for a film, a canto film, Cantonese film out here. But yeah, no, haven't explored. But I wouldn't say never, but I would need a very good coach.
I'm curious about the church in Sweden. It was a very cosmopolitan one, and you mentioned that you had members, congregants from Ghana, and I'm curious, how do you think your music would shift or be inspired by having spent, if you were to spend time in Ghana?
Yeah, I mean it's something we want to do, and we have friends who are Swedish, and they have heritage in Ghana, and they have said one day we need to go with them, and they'll show us around and all of those things. I'm absolutely here for that. And actually, no, I tell a lie. There, I have sung in Swahili, Twi, which is a Ghanaian language, and maybe I'm not sure which one, but a South African language, but I'm not sure which language, because our church was very diverse. But I was never leading on my own, and we were taught by people who were native speakers. So again, cultural appropriation and all of that. But yeah, the church itself was very diverse. So the church had a Swedish part, it had a Korean congregation, and then it had an international congregation. And I think it's changed quite a lot now that it's a little bit more mixed and all kind of coming into one, which is nice. But at the time, the international congregation was very vibrant and very much the largest part of the church in terms of people. I think at one point they had probably about 60 or 70 different nationalities all coming together. And so that was like a huge influence in terms of like just how people experience life, how people experience joy, like how people are happy, how people can grieve as if they are the person who has lost when they are like coming alongside, like the full empathy, like just that spectrum. And then maybe that fed into, in fact, I'm sure it did feed into kind of the emotions piece that has stayed with me, that I saw people just experience life and not shy away from those emotions. Like they would often be dancing along with the singing and just celebration. And it's a big contrast to our church experience in Hong Kong, which is, again, diverse, but also a little bit more subdued when it comes to emotion and kind of, let's say, less Pentecostal, especially when it comes to people who have grown up in this culture. But all of that to say, there's a beauty in that as well, because there's a depth to understanding, okay, well, why do these people experience this, or do they experience things differently, or is it just the outward expression that's different, or is it that you need to kind of peel back the layers of these people to get to know them more? Are these people more extroverted? And so there's a whole range of things that just lend you to asking questions, lend you to deepening relationships. And so I think it's beautiful. But I think also, if you don't experience that with, if all you ever see is a kind of reflection of your own values, color, all of those things, then you're really, and politically, if we're living in an echo chamber of kind of our political views, and I can say this as a Brit who's completely away from US politics, um, then then we're never challenging ourselves to be like, well, why does that person think that? Why are they coming with that perspective? And so I think it's healthy, it's helpful. We've even seen, like, sometimes when we talk to kind of friends and family back home, like, we're like, oh, okay, their perspective hasn't changed on that, but ours has. Why is that? Oh, because we have this different, or we've been able to see it from this person's point of view because that's the situation we're in, whereas they're kind of just living in this bubble with these people.
And I think this speaks to the experience you've described as being citizens of the world. And, within this church, you mentioned, 60 to 70 nationalities. It's an English-speaking international church within a non-primarily English-speaking country,
Mm-hmm.
and the folks there are of different denominations and traditions. And so I'm curious about worship service there. About For such a cosmopolitan crowd, my assumption is you have to focus on the essentials. What does it mean to focus on the essentials? Like, what the unique and the universal, and to unite everyone so that everyone who's there experiences something that they can relate to. How is that rewarding? How is that limiting?
Yeah, so I think we learned from the pastors who we kind of served with, who we just loved working with actually. They said, you have to focus on when language is the thing that unites you, and realize that actually this is English speaking, which is actually not everybody's first language who's coming here when you've got all these different nationalities. So that's not even a uniting factor, right? You then cannot get bogged down with, like, okay, what denomination are you? And they did a series, a sermon series of like denominations basically. But in terms of like, okay, well, what can we take from these denominations that is helpful and like is just adds value and just adds life to what we're doing. And the music, there would be plenty of music and it would be really varied. So we would have kind of, there would definitely be a hymn in there kind of done with a contemporary band, and then there'd be modern worship music, and then there would usually be, like every other week at least, kind of some kind of African medley, we used to call them, because there'd be like a Ghanaian song or a Swahili song or which the whole church basically adopted as their own kind of, it had its own musical identity in many ways, because it just kind of created, and there were some songs that were sung and it was just like, oh yeah, that's a very Emmanuel song to sing. So Emmanuel was the name of the church. And so it would be funny because like maybe a pastor had introduced it and it was from the 70s and you wouldn't sing it in another church necessarily, but it was part of the church identity. It was like, oh yeah. And it was, it brought people together. Um, and they did so much in the church for community, like to foster that community. So there were lots of potlucks. And if you have the opportunity to have an international potluck with people who are coming from Asia and Africa and South America, do it. Because those people, they will basically, in what their family are bringing, they will cater for everybody, and then there are all the other people who bring the dishes, and so you end up with just like this feast, like a banquet. And yeah, so you bond over kind of food, and you bond over the things that unite you. And it was, I would say, it was the at the time, when they were the pastors there, it was just like the best community. Like on Christmas Day, the pastors would open their home for everybody who didn't have a family, or for just everybody in the church. And so they opened their home, and you'd have kind of up to 100 people rocking up to their house and to celebrate, because these people were, it was their home away from home, it was their family, their chosen family. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like this, like, beautiful kind of, you can say kingdom vision, but it really was, it was And there were some hard times as well working with like in culture, because you're working with the Swedish culture as well. Very, very different to kind of what the international community were wanting to do. But like there was such a vibrancy within the church, within the congregation, the international congregation, that was just not like I've experienced anywhere else.
You mentioned in an interview the idea of if you are there, referring to God. And I was initially surprised by your wording, and that helped me understand my own assumptions about the faith of someone who's so dedicated. Can you talk about the doubts and challenges you face and how you navigate them?
I think I don't want to come to any of this with a naivety. Like, I think I've been through a kind of questioning my own faith, a questioning kind of, God, are you there? Is any of this real? Is all of those things. And I'm really glad I have. For me, it's been really healthy that I haven't like taken the faith of my parents and run with it without asking hard questions. We've been through some hard stuff as well, which inevitably kind of asks or inevitably invites questions. And I think that as well is a shared experience that maybe not everybody shares, but there is a, and maybe not everybody acknowledges, but it's been something that I know has resonated with people to say, okay, God, if you're there, then why this? And it's taken me a long time, and it's taken me, and now I view it like this. I take the song Goodness of God, and somebody said to me, I can't sing that right now because I don't believe that God is good. And I said, okay. And somebody said to me one Sunday, I can't sing. I can't be on the worship team today because this is going on in my life. And if God is there, I'm not sure I believe it. And if he is, I don't believe that he is good. And they stayed at church. They didn't sing on the worship team. And I felt moved to say, before we led that song, Psalm 23 tells us, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And we read the psalm and we know it so well. And it's talking about how surely his goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And we almost finish there. We finish at that point and go, okay, great. And then but even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and it's like, it's a valley, and then there's a shadow, and then there's death. Okay, can you get more dark? Can you get to a lower place? And it's saying, God is with me and he comforts me. And there's no promise that you're going to end up on the mountaintop. There's no promise that you're going to end up that everything's okay. But the goodness of God is in him dwelling and being with us and comforting us. And it's kind of how I think of my own role as a parent, and especially to one child who's adopted and my other child is a biological child. But I know that there's going to be things that my adopted child faces that my biological child doesn't. There's going to be questions that he has. And my role will be to be a good mother, and not because I can make everything better for him in his sad moments that may come in a few years' time, but I can comfort him and I can meet him where he is. And if you think of it as, well, if I can't make it all good for him, does that mean I'm not a good mother? No, of course it doesn't. Because I'm there and my role is to comfort him and be there for him, whether he has questions or not, whether he struggles with it or not, whether he, whatever it is that he faces down the road. And when I think of it like that, it's something I've only come to in the last year or so. But that's where I stand with my faith, in trusting that God is good and trusting that he's walking with me, but not taking anything for granted, that it's not a prosperity gospel. That's not what he promises.
Who are all the people you've yet to be?
I think I want to be like a better version of myself. I read a friend of mine posted the other day who lost their mother. They said, if I could have my life 1,000 times over, I would choose my mother to be my mother again and again and again. And I thought, is that how my children view me? Is that how my friends view me? That if I could live this life 1,000 times over, I would choose Anita to be my friend again and again and again. I would choose her to be, especially as a mother, but would Ben choose me as his wife 1,000 times over? I hope so. I would choose him. But that's the question. And I think when I'm not the best version of myself, that's what I've started to latch onto. Would my parents choose me to be their daughter again and again and again? Maybe not for some of the things I've done in the past as a child and as a teenager, but hopefully as an adult, they would, you know. And so, yeah, I think holding on to some of those reflections and holding myself accountable when I'm like, hey, that wasn't the best version of me. That's not who I want to be. I think that's like a helpful model to have for my kids, but also is a helpful place to hold myself to.
What's something that you were hoping to share about your inner landscape that didn't come up?
I think in many ways, I feel like I'm just getting started. I feel like there's so much left to explore. Like in this conversation, we've only talked about kind of, inspiration on the emotion side of things in terms of the music, but there's just so much, right? I feel there's so much inspiration to be found in the world. And there's also so much to explore musically. Like as a vocal artist, I feel that stuff comes to me all the time and I'm like, oh, I want to experiment with using my voice in this way. So using my voice as an instrument, and just sometimes I hear things that other people do and I'm like, okay, yes, I need to tap into that. That's really, that's not something I've done, but I feel like I could use that in this way, and then like lyrically, and just having these multiple projects has just been just creatively freeing for me. And yeah, I feel excited to be able to continue to create, to be able to continue to explore, to be able to see where stuff goes and see where it lands, for like doors to open, for other doors to close, just kind of, see where it goes. But I feel like it's a really exciting journey to be on.
In this journey of fully becoming oneself, that's really the emphasis of these conversational portraits. And I'm curious, after this conversation, how do you feel about the person you're becoming?
I feel pretty good because I'm on a journey of self discovery. And I know that I am. And I know that I am in this place today. And my experiences, even this conversation, are going to lead me to being a different person on this journey tomorrow and the next day and the next day and next year. And I really like that. One of the things I really like about the Christian values that I have is that they are to exhibit the characteristics of kindness and generosity and goodness. And that's just got to make the world a better place, right? If we all did that, if all major religions in the world said, instead of focusing on the kind of things that divide us, what unites us? How can we use our religion? How can we use our spirituality to bring like beauty, to bring peace, to bring goodness? And I see a lot of that goodness in the culture around us here in Hong Kong. And just as I was on my way over here today, I saw somebody at a market stall where you buy fruit and vegetables just hand the fruit and vegetables over to a child who was with their grandmother, and then spoke to the child and had a conversation. And I thought, yeah, there's a real spirit of generosity to children here. There's a spirit of we look after the children. And I'm like, that's a real Christian value, right? Jesus said, let the children come to me. And sometimes we lose sight of those things. And so I think that's what I want to be doing. I want to be, how can I be adding to the world, adding to the beauty of the world, not only in terms of the music, but in terms of who I am. And I'm not saying I'm anywhere near a finished product because I'm not. So I've got a long way to go. I've got a long way to go. But I'm glad I'm on this journey.
We started off with learning about where you find your silence. And now I'd like to give you the silence to have and or to fill. So the space is now yours.
Well, I would say sometimes I don't have anything to say, and that's okay. Yeah, I don't know. Silence. I think I have a lot to reflect on from this conversation. I'm really grateful for it. Yeah, I appreciate what you're doing by having these conversations with just people from different walks of life, people in different fields, and it just speaks volumes to what we've been talking about, which is this human experience, right? Which is so diverse and so different for so many people, but yet there are things that connect us across all of it. And through my experience, I hold on to the things that connect us, and I would encourage people to hold on to the things that unite us rather than things that divide us. And music's great for that. Like, music is such a connector. It's such a thing that brings people together. It's a human experience that, although we experience it in different ways, people experience it together. And we will never know how that person experienced it because we can never get inside their mind in that way. And that's part of the mystery of it all as well. And that's beauty in itself.
This has been an utter delight, Anita. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for joining for a conversational portrait. I have I'm lamenting all the questions I didn't get a chance to ask, and I realized there's only so much time to do these things. And your answers are so, I like that you've journeyed on them. That you've referenced stories, you've tied in these details that just, it connects so much of your world together, and it was valuable to see how even what I thought might be like oh, this would be a quick question. There's so much richness behind it, so much depth. Like yes, that's there. There's It's all there.
Thank you. I really appreciate having this conversation. I'm glad we can make the times work, time differences and time zones. But thank you.